First, let us offer up a land acknowledgement, acknowledging Hawaii as an indigenous space, whose original people, Kanaka Maoli, have nourished generations and taken care of ʻāina and knowledge systems that have shaped Hawaii in a sustainable and thoughtful way that allows us to enjoy her many gifts today. For this, we are truly grateful. I know I am grateful to raise my daughters here. Okay, we have folks from Paoa, from Hiroshima, from Armonk, New York, from Manoa, Honolulu, Volcano, Waimea, Washington Heights, my old hood, and East Honolulu. Thank you, Malo, all of you for being here. So I'm going to share with you the bios of our illustrious and interesting panelists before introducing organizer and wonderful woman Imani. First of all, we have Dr. Kealani Cook. Dr. Kealani Cook is Kanaka Maoli, originally from Waimea on Hawaiʻi Island. He's an associate professor of history in the Humanities Department at UH West Oahu. Dr. Cook believes that history should be a study of power structures and how power is negotiated. At the University of Hawai'i, he teaches classes on Hawaiian and Pacific history, and his research interests focus on the ties between all the peoples of Oceania. We have also Michael Schuster, who's been a puppeteer and storyteller for the past 45 years. He trained in traditional puppetry in Indonesia, India, Burma, and holds a doctorate in Asian theater from the University of Hawai'i at Manoa. He's a founding member of the Train Theater in Jerusalem, which was founded in 1981, and he has performed in North America, Asia, and Europe. He was also the curator of the East-West Center Gallery from 2004 to 2019, during which time he did an exhibit on some of my mother's objects and artifacts. Thank you, Michael. We also have Larry Seth Steinberg, who many of you will affectionately know from Temple Emmanuel. He serves as an archivist for the Levinson Hawaii Jewish Archives and is a Temple Emmanuel board member. Beyond having direct responsibility for conservation of Temple Emmanuel's religious and historical resources, he does research and writes on its role in Hawaiian history. He graduated from the University of Connecticut with a degree in cultural historical geography, resided in Nevada and the Great Basin for almost 40 years as a historical archaeologist. He worked for the Nevada System or State Museum Archaeological Survey and Nevada's Department of Transportation, and taught in the University of Nevada system. He's also affiliated with the Temple Sinai in Reno, directing its religious school, and earned Shoah teaching certification at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I love that museum. It's so well done, so powerful, and its bookstore is amazing and interfaith. At Sierra Nevada University, he became a fully certified instructor for public grades K through 12, where he taught and designed ethnographic historic coursework on Paiute, Shoshone, and Washoe cultures. Sorry, he did not do that in the K through 12 schools. That's a separate endeavor.
Sort of, but they did know about it.
Oh, there you go. He has always been an active participant of in any community where he has resided, and his son, Caleb Steinberg Kennison, still lives on the Walker River Paiute Reservation, where Caleb is enrolled, is an enrolled Agai Dakota tribal member. Larry was a firefighter, EMT, in the Central Lion Fire District, ambulance chief of Dayton, Nevada, and fire chief of the Silver City. So you are a very multifaceted individual, may I say.
Hyperactive adult is the word.
Well, mahalo all of you for being here today for this conversation. And to set the stage for that conversation and to offer us some context is Imani Altemus-Williams, who's a journalist and emerging documentary producer who's passionate about collecting stories that illustrate the collective experiences of historically colonized people. She seeks to highlight more than injustice, trauma, and pain, and also our inherent resilience and beauty, and this strength-based approach is most appreciated. Her writing has been featured in National Geographic, Documentary Magazine, Intercontinental Crime Magazine, Waging Nonviolence, and more. Raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, Imani received a bachelor's in global studies from the New School University and a master's in indigenous journalism at the Sami University of Applied Sciences. She is honored to serve on the board of directors at the Popolo Project and Hawaii Women in Filmmaking, and she's a recent fellow with the Documentary Magazine and an inaugural Peace Studio Fellow. Wow. Okay, fantastic. I would like to ask Imani that you take over the reins and share some of your life.
Thank you. Well, aloha, everyone. Welcome to the first in a series of 3 webinars that we are doing dedicated to exploring the intersectionality of Native Hawaiian and Jewish histories, topics, and sense of place. This webinar is co-sponsored by AHAverim and the Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. AHAverim is a research project funded by the Jews of Color Initiative, and on our team are Adam Keawe Manalo Camp, Rebecca Maria Goldschmidt, and myself. And the 2 of them are also here in this webinar with us. And representing Matsunaga is the moderator for our webinar series, Auntie Maya Soetoro. And joining us today, as you've heard, are Kealani Cook, Larry Steinberg, and Michael Schuster. Mahalo nui to all of you and everyone here with us for your participation. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Fantastic. So first, I'd like to ask each of you to share a little bit more about yourself, things that were not covered in your bios, which I read, and what has inspired your work and research? And I'm going to ask you to begin, please, Michael Schuster, because you are the first on my screen. And then if you can tap the next person, I'd be grateful.
Sure. Let me talk a little bit about the different kinds of work that I've done, because of my age, it's quite a lengthy period of time. I'd like to talk about the puppetry work that I started studying in the 1970s. And this led me to become involved with all kinds of, let's say, historical theater forms, indigenous theater forms, folk theater forms that were often marginalized as technology has come to more and more of the forefront in various societies. And so throughout the 1970s up until the early 1980s, I then was living in Jerusalem and was a founding member of Train Theater, which is a collective, a puppet theater collective. And this puppet theater collective, we worked with all different kinds of communities in Jerusalem, meaning Christian, Arab, Muslim, Jews, religious, non-religious, anti-religious, and tried to find a common ground where we could perform for these diverse audiences. Later in the end of the 90s, I decided that I should do further research and concentrate a little bit on more my academic side. I received a Fulbright to study in India and worked on a very beautiful tradition in villages in South India. So afterwards, after I got my doctorate, I became involved with the State Foundation on Culture and the Arts. I was basically the folklorist for the state for a few years. And then that work involved me with many people in the local Hawaiian community, as well as all the different communities, whether Okinawan, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Filipino, all the communities that we see here. And then at the turn of the millennia, I started working at the East-West Center and worked very deeply with different traditions, marginalized communities throughout the Asia Pacific, trying to show their art forms, and was able to really sponsor many peoples who were not seen in the traditional museum community. But I was always, and how does this lead into my whole interest into Elias Abraham Rosenberg? I was always fascinated by the story of Elias Abraham Rosenberg. I was first really became interested when my son was bar mitzvahed at Temple Emmanuel, maybe a little bit more than 20 years ago. And in 2019, I realized I was going to be retiring from my work at the East-West Center, and I wanted to do more performance work, which I had not done for several years. And I thought, well, this is a good time to really revisit this story. And the story is so unique. It's such an unexpected encounter between this Eastern European Jewish man in the 1880s and King Kalākaua. And for me, because of what was going on in 2019 politically, was so painful as we watched the rise of white supremacists, and as we watched the anti-Semitism growing across North America. And I felt that in many ways, this was a reenactment of what you could see in a microcosm that was going on here in the 1880s. So I was very moved to look at documents. There's a lot written about Elias Abraham Rosenberg in local newspapers. I was only able to read the English newspapers, but there's more than 30 references to him, very virulent, very full of anti-Semitic tropes, and at the same time, terrible racist comments coming from the leadership of people like Alexander and Lauren Thurston and Reverend Bishop. So there was a wealth of material in which to really try to develop a characterization and story. And my work was as an artist, not as a historian. So I was able to put a production called The King's Dream together, which I am still performing, and will be performing again at Arts at Mark's Garage at the end of May 21st and 28th. So I'll leave it to that, but I think it's so important for us to be discussing the connection between racism, anti-Semitism, imperialism, and colonialism, because in the Western tradition, this comes up over and over and over again.
Thank you. Do you want to go next, Larry?
Surely. Thank you, Maya. I didn't realize you'd have to read that long, rambling biography. It wasn't my intention to use my time up that way. Greetings, I'm Larry Seth Steinberg. I'm from the north end of Hartford, Connecticut. I'm a human. I don't fit into any particular niche. 50 years ago, universities were trying to do that. So I looked around, tried different fields, took one geography course, and everything fell into place for me. All the history I had learned, all the geology I had learned. There was one book called The Man's Role in Changing the Face of the Earth. If anyone remembers it, it was about a 40-pound book on a symposium that was held with little vignettes. I just don't fit into any particular niche. I came out as a cultural historical geographer because they let me form my own curriculum. And then I fell in with bad company and did historical archaeology for 30 years in the deserts of Nevada and down into Mexico. Exposure of something entirely different than the north end of Hartford. My forte in Nevada was military forts and the Pony Express. My son, as I mentioned, Caleb, is half Paiute, so I spent a couple of years in sweat lodges and in ceremonies of various kinds. Retired here, and Temple Emmanuel had to replace some retiring archivists, and I fell in there. Expanded it. As a kid, I did a lot of work with the United Synagogue Youth Department of Youth Activity. So, as has been pointed out by several people in different fashions, this mixture of Jewish and Native Hawaiian and all the other cultures that are here is just fascinating. Borrowing from each other and motivating each other. And I can end it there. I'll not occupy my time with myself. Please go on.
Mahalo. We have Dr. Kealani Cook.
Okay, aloha kako. I'm originally from the Big Island, from Waimea, and also followed kind of a winding path to get here. I started off in engineering and worked as an engineer for a few years, and that was awful. So I quit, and history was something that I had always been into as a kid, but there's not supposed to be careers in history. So I went into engineering instead. And after working for a few years in a career, I decided I would rather do something I liked, and history was it. I came back and did my master's at Manoa and actually studied pirates because it was 2000 and that was really cool. Except pirates don't leave records because you don't take notes at a criminal conspiracy. So there's not that much to write, and Marcus Rediker's already read all the good stuff. And I ended up through that, actually, as a kid, I was really into Hawaiian history, mo'olelo, history, and like my grandpa had a decent library, so I was always digging through that stuff. And in school, kind of fell away from it, and I intermediate school social studies classes where we had Hawaiian history, and it was basically, you guys had a great thing here and you screwed it up, so we had to take over. Was kind of discouraging as a history to read, and I stopped paying attention to Hawaiian history all the way until I came back and was doing maritime history, finding all these sources, and also being around other people who are doing Hawaiian history and Pacific history, and realizing I had kind of screwed up. So I started studying Hawaiian and Pacific history, ended up in Michigan, which is normally not a great place to study it, but they were giving away money, and they had a few Hawaiian or Pacific historians up there, and Amy Stillman, who's a Hawaiian ethnomusicologist. And while I was there, one of the things, because there were so many Pacific Island students and faculty that were non-Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, we're talking a lot, we're reading a lot, we're going to the same conferences, and the realization that even though there are so many contemporary ties between Hawaiians and the rest of the Pacific, and in all our histories, we see all these historical ties, that there really wasn't much work connecting that in any of the published and written histories out today. So I started working on that. And from there, just a general kind of focus on and this is a growing sort of field of how Pacific Islanders not just interacted with the people from outside the Pacific or with other peoples within the Pacific, but like purposely shaped and developed relationships in order to survive and thrive in an era of empire. And my specific sort of interest here is Kalākaua, because unlike pirates, diplomats leave lots of records, and Kalākaua sent an embassy down to Samoa. Well, technically, I got yelled at by the poli-sci people who did not send an embassy. He sent a diplomatic legation to Samoa and Tonga, and digging through their records and how the Hawaiian legation connected to and tied in with Samoan politicians, chiefs, etc., in their effort to create a confederacy, to basically, if we all go down together, it's going to be a lot harder for them to sink us. And so, of course, that's 1887, right before the Bandit Constitution here, and the Germans invade Samoa, so it kind of fell apart. But that's my sort of focus in and interest in Kalākaua.
Well, I thank you for that, mahalo, but I'd love to actually begin with you and ask why you think King Kalākaua felt it was important for Hawaii to make global connections and forge those intercultural relationships. Can you share with us some of his strategy and mindset?
Yeah, so this is the reason I asked earlier how long I would have, because man, this is a long one. So there's a couple of different things that are happening. One, Hawaii is already a central shipping node in the Pacific, and had been for since the 1820s. So Hawaii is already connected into global shipping networks, global economic networks. We were a major part of the China trade through sandalwood, through just outfitting ships. We were already there. So when Kalākaua is coming into his adulthood as a member of the Li'inui, 1840s, 1850s, he's already enmeshed in the world. He's learning English and Hawaiian as he learns, Hawaiian is spoken everywhere in Hawaii, but he is educated in English. He is close with Kamehameha the fourth and fifth. He's a little bit younger than them, but under them, they're, when they were 17 and 19, they traveled to the US, they traveled to Great Britain, etc. So he's already in this era where he is in contact with and connected to people from all across the world, just in Honolulu. He's, he has an sort of intellectual alliance with Fornander. Fornander is a Swedish, a sort of disgraced Swedish student that comes to Hawaii and becomes a judge, and all this. But like, he's connected into all these different,
Here we go. Here help.
In addition, though, as king, and even before he's king, he's known as a host. Kalākaua likes people. He's a people person. You compare him to Kamehameha V, who is much more sort of restrained. Kalākaua is a people person, and as Prince Kalākaua, they are constantly using him as a tour guide. He is the one that when like the Duke of Edinburgh comes to Hawaii, they have all the sort of formal things down at the palace, and then they're like, Kalākaua, go keep this guy happy. And he takes him into the back of, I think it's Pololo Valley. It's one of the valleys, but they basically throws him a giant luau in the back of one of these valleys that the Duke of Edinburgh is going to remember 20 years down the road. When Kalākaua goes to England, and the Duke of Edinburgh writes to his brother, the Prince of Wales, to say, like, this is the guy I was telling you about, hook him up. So Kalākaua is, he's outgoing, friendly people person. He's already very sort of engaged in world affairs. And then as king, he has to deal with some of the political issues, internal and external political issues. Externally, the empires are getting pushy. They're running out of things to take. By the time you get to 1884, I mean, they've sat around a table and they've drawn lines across Africa. They are they're looking to do the same thing in the Pacific. The French are no longer, the French had been the aggressive ones, but they're sort of falling out. The Germans are late to having a nation state, so they're late to empire too, but they're looking to catch up. They're in Samoa and they are constantly disrupting. They're constantly disrupting efforts to stabilize things in Samoa. The British are, it's the British Empire, they're all over the place. And the Americans are looking to sort of, it's not quite that age of the closing of the frontier, but they're getting up to it. We're almost to the point where that Teddy Roosevelt style thinking of like America must expand overseas, like we're getting really close to there and that it's ticking around. So externally, he knows he needs to make connections and ties. He needs people to know that Hawaii is a place that is not just a speck in the ocean that is there to be taken, but that Hawaii is it is a thriving part of this world community, and he is sending diplomatic legations to places. He has diplomatic representatives in a lot of places. He's building off of what Kamehameha III had done in building a diplomatic presence for Hawaii, but he's escalating it. And he goes under the world tour, which is dismissed by the same people who were taking shots at that same group of not Bingham, Thurston, etc. They're taking shots at Kalākaua for going on this world voyage. And they talk about it in Armstrong's book. He talks about like, oh, we're going to show him the world, and he'll be so shamed by how great the world is and how little Hawaii is that he'll just hand the keys over to us. But Kalākaua goes around the world, and what he knows is that if he can make a presence in these courts, he can make a presence in parliaments, etc., like they will know that Hawaii is a place. They will associate it with him. They will have a good understanding, like maybe not a great understanding of what's going on, but they'll at least understand that Hawaii exists and should continue to exist. So he's trying to make those connections as a way of fending off the empires, because we're not going to be able to blow them out of the water. He is also working on torpedoes, but that's always a pipe dream. Like we're not going to be able to get enough torpedoes, but we can make them hurt if they sail into Honolulu Harbor. But he's going across the world. He's creating all these diplomatic connections. And the other thing that's happening is it's the internal sort of imperial aggression that's happening by people like Thurston, by people that are coming in, like Cooper, who's going to come in a little bit later, who are in Hawaii and basically seeking to destabilize Hawaii, either in an effort to get Hawaii annexed by the United States or an effort to put themselves into positions of power. And they had been knocked back by Kamehameha IV. They had been knocked back by Kamehameha V. And with Kalākaua, there's this kind of moment where they're thinking, well, maybe we can push him around. And they do constantly push on him. And what Kalākaua embarks on internally is this huge effort to hoʻohoaloha, grow the lahui. And part of that is we're still facing depopulation because of all the different diseases coming in, but also to grow the lahui in terms of its culture, like to revive the culture. And the culture never dies. People say, oh, like Hula died. Hula never died. It had to go underground for a little bit. But it's something that Hawaiians were always participating in, but also being taught from the pulpit to be ashamed. And what Kalākaua is doing is embracing that culture. Like Kamehameha IV and Kamehameha V did what they could, but Kalākaua really pushes hard to have this sort of national embrace of the culture as a modern Hawaii. That is not an archaic thing left over. It is part of a vibrant Hawaii. And that means he needs to connect Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian ties to the world into a single vision of the nation. That Hawaii cannot be just this, the options that are presented by the missionary faction are Hawaii is only this archaic state that needs to go away, or Hawaii completely gives up all things that are Hawaiian and becomes a tropical New England. He says, no, those are both garbage options. What I want is a modern Hawaii that is able to pull on Hawaiian ideas. It's able to pull on foreign ideas and bring them together and create a, do what cultures do, which is maintain, but also adapt, maintain and adapt.
That's okay.
And then, in order to
It's
do
about
that,
Kalākaua.
he has to have those ties. He has to have those connections. And sorry, and finally, one last thing. He's also very intent on looking for alternatives to Euro-American, what the Congregationists especially are pushing, but what a lot of the empires are pushing, which is a very specific Euro-American Christian vision of the world, right? That all modernity, all progress has to come through this vision, that all civilization comes through this vision. And the term Na'awao, enlightenment, is, they're like, the missionaries push that it is us and it's us only. So one of the things he's doing is he's really interested in looking for evidence of Na'awao in elsewhere in the world. So when he goes to Japan, he is super stoked to see what's going on in Japan, because Japan is holding on to their culture, but also, embracing the world at the same time. And then he talks about, wanting to bring back some Buddhist missionaries to Hawaii, as a way of like showing that, like, hey, there's other routes. There's other routes to sort of spirituality, but there's other routes to Na'awao out in the world. And if the Japanese can have their Na'awao, if he talks about bringing back from India, bringing back idols, so that he can show that other people who worship idols were also, like, they created India. And you can't really go to India and say there's not a civilization there. I mean, that civilization is like big and old. So he says, okay, we'll embrace all of those things to show Hawaiians that there are other routes and we can just develop our own route. It doesn't have to be what he as a kid was told by the missionary teachers. It can be what he is envisioning as an adult. And I will stop talking there.
Thank you, Mahalo. I think that, more of this important information will emerge from you and the others as the conversation continues. But thank you for getting all of that in, and it is of interest and it is relevant. So appreciate you being concise, but also informative. I want to ask everyone now, kind of, why do you think that King Kalākaua and Mr. Abraham Rosenberg were drawn to one another? And can you tell us a little bit more about that relationship? Let's start with Larry Seth Steinberg, and then if anyone else wants to jump in.
Thank you for not mentioning the Cornwall Missionary School from Connecticut. I do appreciate that. When the Religion 101 classes come to Temple Emmanuel to see one Friday night service, I usually give a tour afterwards. And I had fallen into talking about two cultures that, how fascinating it was that two cultures that never ever should have met cross paths here. And the question that Imani sent about the personalities involved got me refocused. What was the attraction between the two was her question. And they were attracted just like a magnet. Their personality traits extremely similar. Kalākaua is described as convivial personality, entertaining, playing the ukulele and singing. Rosenberg is noted for having a quick smile, rapid wit, and it made him a popular figure in the Honolulu community. So they're meshing on that level. They all have both display curiosity. And in this, Kalākaua is kind of, he's been upset, the whole place has been upset since the 1820s in the missionaries. He also was an appointed king, not passed down through heritage. So he's kind of back on his heels to prove himself. He's a sponge. He and Kapiolani go on that 1881 tour of the world. He's looking for some outlet to bring back religion that has been almost driven away from the people. So he goes to Japan, he sees Shinto. He goes to the Malay Peninsula. He goes to India, and he sees Hinduism. Chinese sees Buddhism. Goes up the Red Sea to Egypt, sees Islam. Crosses the Mediterranean, pulls in a little semblance of Roman Catholicism. Then up to Church of England and the Lutherans and all that. He is a sponge for information. Who's he run into? Elias Abraham Rosenberg, rabbi, never had a congregation, but you don't get that by the rabbi title. Rabbi derives from the word for teacher. And we all know teachers. Teachers work for lesser wages to get the personal satisfaction of putting out knowledge. So you have a sponge and you have a source, and they come together here in Honolulu.
May I ask you?
Kalākaua has the weight of a monarch, but he was appointed by the ali'i, and he's kind of proving himself. The missionaries had banned chanting in the hula, or at least suppressed it. And this is part of their culture. They are an oral tradition kind of people, and what they pass along, their myths and their histories and their genealogy, is not dependent on the written word at that point. And Kalākaua is exposed to all the religions in that 1881 trip. He runs into Rosenberg, who has a written language. Also the chanting. The chanting seems to reappear itself time and time again. And Rosenberg sits down. There's a lot of feedback about sitting around in the mansion, the Kealani Palace, and doing a little bit of drinking and playing cards till late at night. Well, this is the custom of the 1880s, 1890s. Everyone had a parlor. In Hartford, we always learn stories of Mark Twain in the third floor of his mansion, shaped like a steamboat, playing billiards and writing and entertaining up there. That's something that people did. And both Kalākaua and Rosenberg are suited to this melding of each other.
May I ask Michael Schuster to jump
There's
in?
something that's going on here with ʻāina. I refer to it as in my geography background. What Kalākaua was trying to do is still unsatisfied and with us. If you read last week's newspaper, there was a proposal put forward to start teaching Hawaiian as a language in all the schools, at least a smattering of it, to get people from the outside familiar with Hawaii through the language. You have developers here that want to build high-rise, concrete, square-roomed structures and put Hawaiian people in them. Folks that doesn't work with native population. They need to have their feet in the soil, the same way as the Paiute, Shoshone, and Washoe. It's ʻāina. It's a merging of person kind in the earth, and that is the story in the past and hopefully the future. of Hawaii.
Thank you, mahalo. I'm going to, I don't mean to be
yield.
rude and to interject. It's just that we have a lot of questions left and not a lot of time left. So I just want to make sure that, you know, if we can do like 3 to 5 minutes per question. Thank you. I'd love for, I know Michael Schuster has a lot of information to share as well. So forgive me for pressing forward, but please share with us. You're muted, Michael. Mhm.
Okay, good. Can you hear me now? Yes, good. So I think the best way for me to explain is to show a very short 3-minute piece from my show that would kind of connect to the things that people have been talking about. So let me just set this scene. I'm going to be speaking with an accent inspired by my grandfather's, who was from Ukraine. And we know that Elias was from Eastern Europe. And I'm going to read from an imagined diary. So you'll get a better sense of some of the issues that I think are salient. So the diary first starts with this entry. Shortly after, as many of the things, this unique meeting place where Elias has already discussed with King Kalākaua the need to preserve culture, the need to carry on culture, and how the Jews have done it have been through the recording of our customs and laws through after the fall of after the fall of Israel 2,000 years ago, how those things have been kept going at that time. So I'm going to read just a quick bit of this show. February 4th, 1887. I meet with the king, become his teacher and advisor. So much has happened in the last period of time. I'm meeting regularly with the king, and we discuss many important ideas late into the night. Sometimes we drink a little l'chaim, but that only helps us understand the many mysteries of life. L'chaim. As I look to the immediate future, I am greatly concerned for the king's safety and the stability of the kingdom. The missionary party is increasingly enraged and horrified about Kalākaua's support for the wisdom of the old ways. The king has recently appointed me as an advisor. Now, some translate this from the Hawaiian and call me a soothsayer, but I see myself more as an adept with the understanding given to those who look beneath and beyond the surface of events and personalities. The king has given me a special room in the palace where I can study, focus, meditate. He loves to hear the chanting of our sacred Torah, and he's asked for me to teach him Hebrew. I also share with him Mishnaic stories which both entertain and inform. He's beginning to understand our ability to interpret the past and still look to the future. Recently, he suggested that I become the customs appraiser. In this way, I no longer have to depend on kindnesses and gifts from those I help. My newfound grace in His Majesty's eyes has brought both of us much criticism from the missionary party. They hate a plurality of viewpoints and believe that only their system is viable. As we say, an ass loves to hear his own brain. Im elech bekerev Torah tieni alach oevai. Though I walk in the midst of trouble, thou wilt revive me. Thou shalt stretch forth thine hand against the wrath of mine enemies. It is a difficult time. So, I think that encapsulates so many of the issues that were being talked about at the time. The need to preserve culture, the need to look for different viewpoints. Here is, the text of the Bible that the missionaries are teaching, but there's a completely different interpretation done by Jewish people. They had a lot in common. There was incredible crisis going on in the Jewish communities in Eastern Europe. The terrible pogroms starting with Kishinev in 1881 happened, just at the same time that these these imperialists were clamping down on every possible territory. And if you look at the writings, you'll see that they're connecting this awful racism with minstrel shows and invective writing at the same time that they are bringing all these anti-Semitic tropes. So they had a lot to share, and they were also, like Larry said, they were bon vivant. They also liked to enjoy the beauty, the joy of life. And they were both from mystical traditions. If you were raised in Eastern European Jewish community in the early 19th century, as if you were raised in Hawaii, you would have been very familiar with mysticism. And we know Kalākaua was very interested in mysticism. And we know that, that Elias Abraham, from his background as a rabbi coming from the Eastern European cultures, would have also had a very powerful mystical intention. So I'll leave it at there. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schuster. And Dr. Cook, would you like to add anything?
I think most of it is already been covered, but I will say again, the personality aspect. I mean, Kalākaua was eager to engage with people, especially to engage with people who with different perspectives, with new perspectives. The Celso Moreno, the whole thing with Celso Moreno, a real similar thing. He seemed to be pretty close again with Fornander, but just that idea of he is often trying to grab onto and engage, and like you're saying, the sort of sponge thing, like absorb as much as possible. I mean, even just on the trip in order to get to Japan and China, he had to bounce to San Francisco first. And that's actually one of the things he was trying to organize, was shipping with Hawaii as a central node rather than Hawaii getting cut out of a lot of the shipping. And he runs into an astronomer, and he spends pretty much the entire trip talking to the astronomer about Hawaiian astronomy, and then making these connections with the sort of, at that point, top of sort of state of the art vision of what astronomy should be in the 1880s. He's always searching to make those connections, store them away, and then often from there try to make use of them later. It's at that point, it's a matter of it's something that helps him thrive, but by the time we get to the 1880s, it is a matter of survival that Hawaii is going to need to be able to do that. Putting that in.
Thank you. So Larry shared a lot about their respective personalities, and certainly also connected past and present and future. I'd like to ask all of the panelists if you can speak to, and maybe especially the philosophical, political, and spiritual parallels between the two men, as well as the Native Hawaiian and Jewish communities more broadly. Again, thank you for not only building this bridge, but also thinking and helping us to think about how the past ties in with the future. And thank you, Dr. Schuster, for your storytelling, which made us feel like we were in the past. I'm most appreciative. But yeah, perhaps, Larry, would you mind beginning and talking a little bit about what you see as the spiritual philosophical connection?
Unmute myself. I think we have a long, myself included, have a long history of being a submerged population. In the imperial czar's Russia, we were in the Pale of Settlement. Jews seem to only pick on each other rather than other civilizations, and I think that produces kind of a gentleness, a receptiveness. Sometimes I think of myself as a scribe writing down things instead of producing things. And I think, I'm sorry, it's my analogy of the sponge and the teacher, but I think that fits well. There are many accomplished teachers at all levels with a background of Judaism. The teachers are respected, and Kalākaua is respectful of people that give him information. They are giving him keys that he can try in the lock that has been placed on his civilization.
Would anyone else like to speak about the philosophical and spiritual connection between the two men, but also remember to feel free to also speak about the Hawaiian and Jewish community more broadly.
I can speak to a little some of the Jewish perspective. I mean, I think if you look at Deuteronomy, and it's, one of the strongest points in Jewish culture is justice shalt thou pursue. And this is really, really important in a Jewish perspective. And I think this would have appealed to Kalākaua, because you could look around and seeing the incredible injustices that were going on and were occurring at that time. The Bannock Constitution happened just as Elias was leaving, because the situation was so terrible that the descendants of the missionary party and the descendants of the missionary like Thurston, whose family came in 1820, we're horrified by rejuvenation of hula, they were always afraid of these heathen practices. And I think Elias could offer an alternative viewpoint, looking at biblical texts in a different way. So, you get from Psalms, Az tismach v'tzorach, they shall dance and be glad, young women will dance and so will men. So I think there's a lot of joy that is being suppressed in the culture, and this concept of this mystical concept of, in order for God to be whole, you have to have tikkun ha'olam, you have to fix the world, make it a wholeness. I think that would have very much appealed to Kalākaua, but I would like somebody else to speak about the Hawaiian spiritual perspective rather than me. But I think this denial of religious freedom for Jews to be respected in the world and to continue their culture would have been so touch him so deeply, and he would understand this, and he would realize also that his culture was under great threat, and what strategies could possibly work to continue viability.
Thank you. Dr. Cook?
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in with some of the Hawaiian side, and knowing very little about the Jewish side. So I'll throw some stuff out and see what sticks. One of the on sort of a practical level, or not practical, but outside the spiritual level, in terms of sort of existing within a world largely dominated by Euro-American Euro-American empires, etc. One of the things that does come out is Hawaiians and Jews are both in a position where they are part way in. Where Hawaiians, for instance, there's like a racial other, but at the same time, it's something that Lisa Kahaleole Hall has called racist love, and other people have talked about, where Hawaiians are often exposed. There's a certain amount of racism in how Americans especially sort of viewed Hawaii in that time and to the present, but it's often portrayed in this vision of sort of racist love, like, we like you, but you're children and we have to take all your shit. It's like racist love. Like Jewish people have for a long time, especially in the US, been in this position of whiteness, but also not. This sort of ethnic whiteness plus this religious otherness that in times where it is convenient for to be like, well, you're part of us because we're oppressing Black people, then there's sort of an acceptance, but it is not a full, it's 1 foot into the system. Enough in the system to be able to engage with it, but also enough push back from the system to be constantly reminded that you are not in that sort of those seats of power. So there's something there that I think for Kalākaua would have been very sort of engaging. And on a spiritual note, one of the things I was curious about is, and this is when I was going through, I did some digging into Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian missionaries who went to the Marquesas and Micronesia. And these are the devout of the devout. These are the ones that the Congregationalists chose to go out there. And even they're out there screaming about how hula is bad and how like the people of the Marshall Islands shouldn't be dancing hula and it was evil in Hawaii too. And so they're very sort of in that Congregationalist worldview up until the point where someone dies. And when someone dies within Hawaiian culture, there's like a period of mourning, and it is somewhat performative because you need to show that person and show others how much their death means, because if you do not, then you don't really have aloha for that person. And we tend to, like, it is aloha hurts. It's not like happy, like aloha hurts because it is, that person is part of you now. And so even these missionaries, these Hawaiian missionaries, when they go out, when a spouse dies, some of them go, there's standard mourning things, which are like, it's like you hit a depression kind of thing, and you are just constantly in this thing where it includes, for instance, like the ue, like very sort of loud expressions of mourning, and writing kanikau, which are funeral dirges, all of these things that the Congregationalists were very, in a lot of ways, even the most strict Hawaiian Congregationalists pushed against things that kept them from expressing love, and how important that was to the spirituality, how important those personal connections were to spirituality. And they are attacked for it. Even some of the Hawaiian missionaries, one of them, when his child dies, goes into a full sort of, starts drinking and smoking tobacco as an expression of having gone crazy. And that was sort of seen as an extreme expression of their love for the person who had passed. And the other Hawaiian missionaries covered it up because they're like, we know exactly what's happening and this is proper. For him to do this is to show his love. As soon as the American missionaries heard about it, they're like condemning it. Because they're coming from the Congregationalist worldview where to mourn someone who has passed is wrong, because either they were not good enough and they went to hell and you shouldn't be mourning them, or they were good enough and they're in heaven. But your personal love and loss of connection for that person is meaningless. So I'm curious to see if there's other sort of ways where that sort of, in terms of the spirituality in terms of connections to people and expressions of those connections, through mourning practice, etc., might also connect. In other ways that like the chanting, etc., are very, it's very human. It's very sort of connected. It's the body, it's the voice, etc. That's these expressions of spirituality, rather than sitting there and sort of arguing within the congregation as the congregationists would approve of.
Interesting. Mahalo. All right, I want to move to audience questions. Dan in chat asks, where did Elias Rosenberg get the Torah that he gave to Kalākaua? Anybody know? Dr. Schuster, I think you're speaking, but you're muted.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think there is really nobody who knows how Elias Abraham Rosenberg received this beautiful, beautiful Torah. I think Larry could speak to some of that, but also the silver pointer for reading the Torah with is unique. So they're inscribed for him, but where he received them, and to make a Torah takes like a year and a half to write. It takes a ritually trained scribe a year and a half to write the Torah out. So it's a very, very expensive item. It's very, very precious. It's very, very spiritual. You have to be a spiritual person in order to inscribe God's word in the Torah. But where it came from, I don't think there's a record of where it came or how it came, or how the silver pointer, which has Elias's name on it, it says Eliyahu Avraham. So, but
I think Larry might know. Mr. Steinberg, did you, or I saw you raise your hand?
Yes, I don't have it in front of me. It's probably in one of my other computers. We have had a sofer, a scribe, here a number of times, doing the upkeep on our various Torah scrolls. Let me start with the yod, the pointer. The yod, when you look at it, is Yemeni. The design work is Yemeni. And I questioned a sofer that was here about 5 years ago, and he said, "Oh no," he said, there was a displaced population of Yemeni silversmiths that were driven out of the Middle East and took residence in what was Poland at the time, and created their patterns, but in that Eastern European, that Polish background. The little plates that are on there say that the yod was completed for Rosenberg in fulfillment of a pledge, promise he had made. So we have that much information. The scroll itself, okay, I've stopped calling it a Torah. I call it a scroll to be more accurate. It was never finished. The initial paragraph, Bereshis, Bora Elohim, was never completed. The last paragraph at the end was never ritually completed. So it is a scroll, and although it was loaned out to the Jewish community from about 1901 on, it's not formally a Torah, consecrated Torah. It is of Eastern European origin, in that area between Poland and Russia. Can't identify it. It's well done. The parchment, the cloth, is all the same quality. It isn't one that was put together by someone as a sales thing. It was a commissioned Torah, commissioned scroll that was put together for a purpose. And how it arrives with Rosenberg, we don't know.
Thank you. There's another question. Is there any understanding of Kalākaua's sense of the Jewish people outside of his relationship and conversations with Elias Abraham Rosenberg? Michael, I
Yeah.
see you speaking. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. I cannot help but think he would have been aware because he was raised on Bible reading. So he would have to have understood the concept of genealogy, which is so important to Hawaiians. It's also very important to Jews. You know, we trace our genealogy to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, etc. So, and these long lists of genealogies, he would be aware of the stories of Jews. Whether he met Jewish communities, I don't know on his travels. Certainly he wouldn't have met anyone from Eastern Europe. The Eastern European Jews would be very unlikely. He might have met communities of wealthier German Jews that did come to San Francisco and were much more established. But the mystical traditions of Eastern Europe, I don't know if before he met Elias Abraham, if he had exposure to those folks.
I had some high hopes. Museum of Art sent me a copy of their magnificent book on the King Kalākaua era. That 1881 voyage, the transworld trip, I had high hopes that at the end he takes the railroad from New York to San Francisco, and he stops in Cincinnati. Okay, so I have high hopes. Maybe he stopped and went to Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. Maybe he's going to look at the reform movement. And I got into the local newspapers. Kalākaua was a king. He went to look at racehorses about 30 miles south of Cincinnati and never made it to the Hebrew Union College. So I know of no affiliation. Of course, he died shortly thereafter, and his scroll was displayed in a tent outdoors. So I found no other interaction.
Thank you. Could you speak to the use of chanting in both cultures and how Oli might have connected the cultures and men? Michael, you're muted.
Sorry. Okay. Undoubtedly, Kalākaua was very moved by the chanting tradition. And I think he would have been very excited to realize that the scripture that he had been taught in the congregational system could be chanted, and that people had continuity of chanting and retelling their stories over millennia. So I think that would have been thrilling for him. Certainly shortly after the overthrow, he came out with his books about myths and legends of Hawaii. And he speaks to the connection in the introduction. There's mention of the connection, relationship between Jewish culture or Hebrew culture and the Middle Eastern cultures and the Kushite cultures. So I think he would have been very moved, and of course would want to know that Oli can be very sacred and should be revived and continued, and I think Elias Abraham Rosenberg would be a strong advocate for him for the belief of continuity of culture and bringing culture from the past into the future.
Thank you very much. So in the 3 minutes that remain, I wonder if anyone would like to kind of speak to, why is this important for us to know about moving forward? Why should this be taught in schools? For me, I think that this is a strong peace and bridge building conversation. But if you could just speak to why is the history of their friendship important and relevant for the people of Hawaii to know today, especially the keiki? Yes, Dr. Cook, Kealani.
Yeah. So one of the things that stories like this, or Kalākaua's efforts to create connections with the Japanese, etc., one of the things that it does is it destabilizes the vision of the imperial vision of the world, where everybody else except for Europe and America, and specifically like white European American empire, like imperial crusaders, for lack of a better word, going out into the world, except for that, everyone sat still and just waited to be discovered. And like they weren't interested in the rest of the world, because that version of things validates empires. That version of things where it's like, oh, Hawaiians didn't have connections to anyone except for, well, Cook, we took care of him, also no relation. And then the Americans came in. So of course, America took over Hawaii, because Hawaii didn't have connections to the outside world except for through America, except for through these Americans. And stories like this, even, you know, again, when he went to Johor, I mean, Kalākaua develops this, it's a really quick sort of meeting between him and the Maharaja of Johor, and they're both sort of Anglophile native rulers, but really quickly they, instead of talking about English things, they really quickly start talking about their connections by naming numbers, and then talking about stories and realizing the linguistic connections between, because they're both Austronesian languages. They're both speaking Austronesian languages. So the more we look at these ties and connections outside of the sort of direct imperial presence in Hawaii, the more it destabilizes this vision of course the empires happen. What else could have happened? How could we have anything except for America taking over? Only America had contact with Hawaii. So I think these stories are great for, especially in Hawaii, because that's the stories that were kind of told in school growing up. I don't know, hopefully it's gotten better, that justify American empire. So these stories destabilize that, and they take away the justification for it, and then it becomes theft. So
Thank you.
In Yiddish, these things are bubamaises, your grandmother's stories. Folks, you're living in something that's ongoing. Okay, you're sitting on an island that is the coal depot for the fleet in the 1890s. And where are you sitting? I'm about 15 miles north of the largest fuel depot in the Pacific. Nothing has changed except this leaks a little more than coal dust, and it affects us. I'm an unbiased geographer. It's the land and it's the people and how they meet together.
Michael, I think you're muted again, but would love some closing thoughts from you.
Yeah, I just like to end, I'm unmuted, I hope. I just like to end with the human connection. We all have the ability to understand each other if we make connection. And so great differences can be overcome if we can overcome our antipathy for difference. And I think this is an amazing story of two cultures that are very different, but deep understanding on a human level can create a much better world. And I think that's essential.
Thank you. Well, that's a beautiful way to end our conversation. We are at time. I want to just spotlight two comments here. One is from Adam Keave Manalo, and there were other people of Jewish ancestry who worked with Mo'i Kalākaua, including Paul Newman and Abraham Hoffman. Thank you. Interesting. And Kealani Cook says Tiffany Ng might know regarding the journey of the Torah. I think this is. She's dug through newspaper articles and Kalākaua speeches probably more than anyone, or maybe that was about whether he had had exposure to Jewish culture, right? Okay, thank you, Dr. Cook. Okay, well, mahalo everyone for this conversation. I hope that you'll join us for our next AHAverim conversation. Imani, can you remind us here of the date for that?
Yes, the next one will be next Wednesday at the exact same time. So February 22nd at 2 p.m. to 3:15 p.m. So this time.
Fantastic. And mahalo to our tech, Rebecca, and to all of you here in attendance. And we are grateful for your presence and your curiosity, and mahalo to the panelists for all of your interesting sharings. And have a beautiful rest of the day. Aloha.